The river rushed through the dense Alaskan wilderness, its waters wild and untamed. The mountains loomed high above, casting long shadows across the valley, while the thick pines stood as silent sentinels along the banks. The scent of wet earth and pine hung heavy in the air, the forest alive with its own mysterious energy. The world was still, save for the thundering roar of the river cutting through the landscape. Emery Klein tightened the straps on his backpack, his breath coming out in visible clouds in the crisp air. He had come to this remote corner of the world searching for peace, seeking respite from the chaos that had overtaken his life in recent years. The mountains, with their raw beauty and quiet power, had always been his refuge, a place where time seemed to stand still. But nothing could prepare him for the sound that would shatter his solitude. A faint cry, high-pitched and desperate, cut through the air. Emery's heart skipped a beat as he spun around, his eyes scanning the darkened river. There was a movement, a flicker of something dark bobbing in the water. A small bear cub. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The cub was struggling against the fierce current, its tiny body flailing in vain as it was swept downstream. Without thinking, Emery dropped his pack and sprinted toward the water. His boots slid over the slick ground as he reached the edge, eyes fixed on the cub, which was moments away from being lost to the river's pull. Instinctively, he dove into the icy waters, the coldness biting into his skin like needles. The river was unforgiving, each wave crashing against him, threatening to drag him under. But Emery pushed forward, his hands reaching for the cub, now barely clinging to life. The water was so cold, so powerful. His muscles burned as he swam with everything he had. "Hang on," he gasped through chattering teeth. "I've got you." He reached the cub, feeling its small, trembling body under his grasp. The bear cub let out a terrified whine, but Emery held on, kicking through the water with every ounce of strength he had left. The current pulled at him, but he refused to let go, his eyes fixed on the shore, where the trees loomed like giants, waiting to offer sanctuary. Finally, with one last powerful stroke, he reached the bank. His legs collapsed beneath him as he dragged the cub to safety, both of them exhausted and gasping for breath. The bear cub shivered violently, but it was alive. The night was deathly still for a moment as Emery caught his breath, his heart hammering in his chest. But then the silence was broken. A deep, guttural growl rolled through the air, a sound so low and primal that it made Emery's blood run cold. Slowly he lifted his gaze toward the opposite bank. There, framed by the dark outline of the trees, stood the mother, a towering figure, her massive form outlined in the moonlight. Her coat was thick and golden brown, her powerful muscles rippling beneath her fur. She was watching him with intense, unwavering eyes, eyes that seemed to see straight into his soul. Emery froze, the weight of the moment sinking in. He had no weapon, no way to defend himself. The mother bear was a force of nature, a creature so much more powerful than him, and yet there she stood, her eyes locked on his, her movements slow and deliberate. The cub, still trembling, whined softly in his arms. He hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound, not yet daring to breathe. The mother bear's eyes never left him. For a long, agonizing moment, the two stared at each other across the river, the tension thick enough to cut through the air. Emery's heart pounded in his chest, and his legs felt weak, but he couldn't look away. The mother was waiting. Then, almost imperceptibly, she lowered her head. A gesture of respect? Or a warning? Emery didn't know, but he didn't dare make a move. The cub, now freed from Emery's arms, took a shaky step toward the water's edge. Its tiny paws trembled as it struggled to stand, but with each faltering step, it grew more confident. Slowly, it made its way toward the mother, its body still weak from the river's cold grasp. The mother bear didn't move. She simply watched, her massive form still and unmoving, as the cub finally reached her side. The smaller bear pressed against her, seeking comfort, seeking warmth. Emery exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He didn't know what had just passed between him and the mother bear, but there was something there, something raw and ancient. The wildness of it all settled in the pit of his stomach, and a strange peace washed over him. Then, just as he thought the danger was over, the mother bear's gaze shifted. It wasn't a look of aggression, but one that held an unspoken command. She turned her massive head toward the forest behind her, her gaze never wavering. A message, a request. Emery's pulse quickened. What did she want? Why had she brought him here? His instinct screamed for him to leave, to disappear back into the wilderness and never look back. But the strange pull inside him grew stronger. Slowly, carefully, he took a step forward. Then another. His feet moved, almost of their own accord, toward the bear. The mother made no movement to stop him, but her eyes followed him, watching every move with a steady, knowing gaze. She had already trusted him once, when she allowed him to save her cub. What more could she possibly want from him? Emery felt his breath catch as he moved into the trees, the heavy silence of the forest swallowing him whole. The moonlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting long shadows on the forest floor. The only sound was the soft crunch of leaves underfoot. Then they reached it. A clearing, bathed in pale moonlight. At its center, the ground was disturbed, wet and bloodied, as if something large had fallen there. Emery's stomach churned, and he stopped dead in his tracks. Lying in the middle of the clearing, half covered in dirt and blood, was another bear. It was larger than the mother, its fur matted and soaked with blood, its breath shallow and uneven. Its body was torn, its wounds deep. It was still alive, but barely. Emery's heart sank as he knelt beside the massive creature, his hands trembling. The mother bear moved to his side, her presence overwhelming. She let out a low, rumbling sound, a deep vibration that seemed to come from the earth itself. She was asking him to help, to save her mate. Emery's hands shook as he reached for his medical kit. He had never done anything like this before, never tended to a bear. But in that moment, he understood. He understood that this was not just a matter of life and death. It was something more, something ancient, something sacred. He worked quickly, cleaning the wounds, trying to stabilize the bear's condition. The mother bear watched, her eyes fixed on him, her body tense with worry and anticipation. Emery's heart raced as he applied bandages, trying to stem the bleeding, knowing that every second counted. The injured bear let out a low growl, but didn't move, didn't fight. It accepted the help. The night stretched on in silence, the only sound the rustling of the trees and the faint whisper of the wind through the pines. Emery worked through the darkness, his hands steady despite the gravity of the task. When he finished, he stepped back and wiped the sweat from his brow. The wounded bear was still alive, still breathing. The mother bear let out a soft, throaty sound, almost like a sigh of relief. She nuzzled her mate's side gently, her powerful form a pillar of strength. Emery stood slowly, his body exhausted, his clothes soaked and clinging to him. The forest felt alive around him, alive with a quiet energy, as if the very trees and earth were acknowledging the bond that had just been forged. The mother bear looked at him one last time, her gaze deep and knowing. She turned, her cub trailing behind her, and they melted into the shadows of the forest. Emery remained standing in the clearing, his heart still racing. He couldn't explain it, couldn't put words to the feeling inside him, but he knew one thing for sure. He had been a part of something sacred, something far bigger than he could ever understand. The wilderness had a way of choosing its guardians, and tonight it had chosen him.